Started. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. It's delightful to have Yasuhiko Kimura back, and I'm very excited about today. It's going to be talking about the psychology and cosmology of the Ubermensch. So the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, so this is the 7th session in the series of presentation and discussion under the title New Spirituality of the Future. And the theme is the psychology and cosmology of the Übermensch. More psychology today. The last session, we started with Nietzsche's pronouncement that God is dead. So today, we will resurrect God. So from the spiritual perspective, the radical shift that took place in what Julian Jaynes calls the origin of consciousness in the breakdown of the bicameral mind was the shift of God's residence from the external to the internal. God dwells literally within you. The mistake humanity has made was to continue to believe God to be external or to deny God's existence altogether. With the first mistake came all the organized religions of the world. With the second mistake came all the monistic materialism, which denied God or the spiritual dimension, but still retained the external power mentality and metaphysics. Both have led to nihilism, of which Nietzsche spoke. The crisis of consciousness will be overcome, and a new kind of consciousness will arise when we completely overcome this external power mentality and belief systems, so that we cease to see cause to be external, but realize that the cause is within. We cease to attribute causes to external events, circumstances, and environments. Our human chief delusion is our conviction that there are causes other than our own state of consciousness. The truth of our consciousness is that it is so powerful and causative that all that befalls us, all that is done by us, all that comes from us, happens as a result of our state of consciousness. Throughout the course of history, there have been small groups of people who have actualized this possibility, this potential inherent in consciousness, and who have maintained the foundation of the further evolution of human consciousness. Those are the initiates of the esoteric spiritual traditions. In the West, there are individual geniuses who tapped into this esoteric knowledge relatively independently from esoteric schools. William Blake was one of such examples, who on their own penetrated into the esoteric realm. So I want to start with a quote from William Blake from his Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The worship of God is honoring his gifts in other men, each according to his genius, and loving the greatest man the best. Those who envy or calumniate great man hate God, for there is no other God. William Blake had a friendly relationship with Thomas Paine, who was 20 years senior, exactly, who, as you know, a founding father and revolutionary philosopher, author, and activist, who was involved in both the American and French revolutions, relative to which Blake wrote several poems, such as A Song of Liberty, it's about America, America, a Prophecy, the French Revolution. Blake and Paine were aligned in their condemnation of institutionalized religion, but they disagreed in their evaluation of the faculty of reason, the rational faculty of the human intelligence. Thomas Paine published The Age of Reason, boldly challenging the validity of the institutionalized religion and legitimacy of the Bible as interpreted by the authorities, while arguing for the philosophical position of deism, which at that time was essentially equivalent with Spinoza's immanentism, which was later called pantheism. William Blake evaluated the poetic imagination or the poetic genius as categorically higher than reason, and argued against the rationalistic philosophy of the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment, epitomized by Isaac Newton and John Locke. He called his advocation for the poetic genius as the voice of one crying in the wilderness. He was the minority of one. So Thomas Paine was ahead of his time in the sense of being at the leading edge of the Age of Reason. William Blake was ahead of his time in the literal sense. He was the voice of the Age of Imagination that was to come after the Age of Reason and Enlightenment. In several of my presentations, I have characterized the next stage of human evolution as the Age of Imagination. William Blake lived in his imagination in the world of the Age of Imagination, probably 300 years ahead of his time. At the time when the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment was nearing and then attaining its peak. And for him, the imagination, the human imagination, the poetic genius was God. Another poem, actually this is more like a prose. There is no natural religion. B, he says this: if it were not for the poetic or prophetic character, the philosophic and the experimental would soon be at the ratio of all things and stand still, unable to do other than repeat the same dull round over again. He who sees the infinite in all things sees God. He who sees the ratio only sees himself only. And another statement from All Religion Are One. He says this: the poetic genius is the true man, and the body or outward form of man is derived from the poetic genius. Likewise, the forms of all things are derived from their genius, which by the ancient was called an angel and spirit and demon. Demon in the sense of daimon, which is a Greek word for genius, which is in Latin, both of which means soul. So today we are going to explore the psychology and the cosmology of the Übermensch. And as you know, the term the Ubermensch was first used by Nietzsche and associated with him. But here in the context of this series, I'm using the term to mean the new kind or species of the awakened and evolved human beings to come in the age of imagination. So the Ubermensch designate the spiritually awakened and the intellectually enlightened human being of the age of imagination who embodies the new kind of spirituality of the future. Elsewhere, I use the term homo deus. But since we are following the presentation of Nietzsche, we will use the Übermensch, which actually means homo deus in the way I use it. Homo deus means divine man, as you know. Now, Nietzsche extols Goethe as the prototype of the Übermensch. And Goethe was, as we know, a polymath genius, but in essence, he was a poetic genius, just as Blake was. To me, Sri Aurobindo is a poetic genius. So Goethe and Blake and Nietzsche himself, therefore, were prototypical precursors of the Ubermensch. And we have many precursors throughout the history in the West and in the East. One of these days, we may do the kind of inventory of those people. But today I focus on Blake. So now, what kind of psychology and consciousness will the Ubermensch have? What kind of philosophy and cosmology will the Ubermensch have? That's the question. Modernity, with its scientific worldview, has brought about an irreconcilable ontological schism and separation. The best term is diremption, the separation between matter and mind, or body and soul. That which thinking things and extended things, which was initiated and exemplified the philosophy of René Descartes. The Cartesian paradigm defines the fundamental worldview of modernity, including physics, cosmology, psychology, and cognitive science. This Cartesian paradigmatic schism or diremption between matter and mind, or the external world and the internal world, constitutes a fundamental element of the crisis of consciousness. However, the diremption, the separation, will be completely resolved in the cosmology and psychology of the Ubermensch. There will be a complete reconciliation and theoretical unification between the cosmology, the external world, and the psychology, the internal world. That is, the cosmology of the macrocosm and the psychology of the microcosm will be united under the same ontological structural principles. Therefore, spirituality in science, or the spiritual worldview and scientific worldview, will be united inside a single framework. The universe will be seen at once as the anthropocosmos and the cosmoanthropos. The possibility and the potential that are inherent in human consciousness have been explored and realized by the individuals belonging to esoteric spiritual traditions, most of which are shrouded in mystery. The philosophers and scholars who study those esoteric teachings express them in mesoteric or exoteric languages and formulations. And by the time they reach the masses, if they ever reach them, become diluted or distorted and made into belief systems. So even when people repeat, a God is within, God is within, it is not that they know what it means. So these are the harbingers of the consciousness of the future, as well as the realizer of the possibility of human consciousness. In the West, Bruno, Spinoza, Nietzsche were examples of the geniuses who on their own penetrated into the mesoteric realm, while Jacob Boehme or William Blake were examples of the geniuses who essentially on their own penetrated into the esoteric realm. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine, they are on the level of mesoteric. I don't see anything esoteric in their writings. So there are 4 or 5 salient features of the psychology of the Übermensch, Homo Deus. One is this: living at the level of cause, not effect. They see themselves as the cause, not the effect. They be cause, and the cause is within. Actually, they are the cause. So man is all imagination, God is man, and exists in us, and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination, that is God himself. This is William Blake. Man is all imagination, God is mind, and exists in us, and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination, that is God himself. God within, the Christ within, to which the Bible repeatedly refers, is to Blake the imagination that dwells in all of us. To Blake, the stories in the Bible is not historical, but psychological. Same story repeated over and over again with different names. Some historical event may have been used as a metaphor, but fundamentally for him, the Bible was the treasury of psychology. So to live from the imagination is to live as the creator. To live from the imagination is to live as the cause. It categorically transcends the state of living as the effect, at the level of effect in the three-dimensional space-time reality. It is to live in the fourth dimension and create therefrom the three-dimensional effects in the three-dimensional reality. This imagination is what Saint Thomas Aquinas termed actus essendi, translated as act of being, which is God, that is, I am, or I am that I am, self-revealing within you as the creative causative power. Thomas Aquinas defined or described this actus essendi, yeah, I think. Act of being a little differently from what I said. This is how Blake understood act of being to be, which is the imagination residing with each one of us. If God is within, then we are the creator of our own world. So in the previous presentation, I mentioned the temporalization of space as a critical new element of the new consciousness that will emerge. The consciousness we have, we spatialize time. And I said a new mode will be temporalizing space. The psychology of the Ubermensch is first and foremost the psychology of the creator, the imaginer. You are the creator of yourself, life, and reality, and therefore you are 100% responsible for your destiny and for your world. Victim consciousness is the default mode of human consciousness. And psychology today, we see ourselves as being at the effect of external factors. Therefore, the psychology of the Ubermensch is a radical departure, a radical transcendence from the present human psychology. And yet it is possible for us living today. When we identify ourselves with our imagination rather than our sensory perceptions, we have discovered the core of reality. So this happened through the breakdown of the bicameral mind. And this possibility and potential have been kept alive by being actualized, realized by few individuals throughout our human history. Many of them are persecuted. Most of them are forgotten. Now we want to resurrect them along with the resurrection of God within us. Now, second element of the psychology of the Ubermensch correspond to what I said, I talked about in terms of the levels of intelligence. And he remarked at the end of his letter to Thomas Butts, who was his sponsor, who purchased many of his plates, and great fan of Blake's philosophy. This letter was dated in November 22nd, 1802. He says this is a poem. Now I, a fourfold vision see, and a fourfold vision is given to me. 'Tis fourfold in my supreme delight, and threefold in soft Beulah's night and twofold always. May God us keep from single vision and nature's, Newton's sleep. He was really against Newton. You can tell. Newton was beyond single vision, by the way. This corresponds with the 4 levels of human intelligence I spoke about in the first session of this series. Level 1 in the computational algorithmic intelligence of information processing. Second is rational intellective intelligence of reason and understanding, space-time realm. Number 3 is intuition and imaginational intelligence of knowledge from the future and creation of the future. This goes beyond space-time. And actually, this is the dimension where you are in a true sense of the word. You be in the time dimension only. You have the view of the past, you have the view of the future, and then you are free from the binding of space. You can revise your past and you become the creator of the future. And number 4, spiritual intelligence of knowledge of and from the transfinite realm, which is beyond time and space. The last 2, intuition, imagination, and spiritual intelligence, belong to the supracorporeal realm, where threefold vision and fourfold vision that William Blake talked about manifest. The first 2 are corporeal. So when you have a single vision, it means sensory perception. Twofold vision is the dualistic reason and conception based on the single vision. That's where most people stay. Threefold vision is the integral conception. So the reason is there, and plus the intuition, imagination entering. So you become free from the bind of the sensory awareness. You can think anew. You can imagine anew, and you receive the information, not from the known, but something beyond the known. But Blake is talking about fourfold vision. Is all of that plus the spiritual intelligence. The difference between spiritual intelligence and any other form of intelligence is that with the other form of intelligence, you know of an object. There's always you being here and knowing. Spiritual intelligence make us aware of the different way of knowing, which is knowing by becoming. So the knower is the known is the knowing. So Blake had fourfold vision opened. And therefore, he has definitely positioned, evaluated the imagination infused with the spiritual intelligence higher than reason, which is bound by the sensory perception and space and time. So the psychology or consciousness of the Ubermensch is full spectrum. All 4 intelligences are working in harmony. But the center of consciousness is situated in the spiritual intelligence inspired imagination and intuition. So today, people's consciousness are more seated in a second level. And occasionally they may have some imagination or intuition, but they are situated in second. Fourfold vision, the consciousness of the Ubermensch. The person lives and operates from spiritually inspired imagination and the intuition. So maybe that's the only difference between Son of God, the Christ, and God himself. The spiritual intelligence is this dimension of divinity. And Christ is an incarnation of that spiritual intelligence in the imagination. Now, the third element, that is very important, it's psychology and of Übermensch, Homo Deus. The psychology is united with cosmology because we will regain the self-awareness of ourselves as a microcosm of the universe, in a true sense of the word, hologram. Entirety of the universe is each one of us. Today we see ourselves is in this material universe, a speck of dust, which has some internal dimension and external dimension. No, we are the universe. The psychology corresponds to cosmology. Therefore, we are able to understand the cosmology in all its ontological dimensions, which correspond to the level of consciousness that we have. So, again, this has been in the literature throughout human history. The cosmology of the macrocosm or universe and the psychology of the microcosm or the human consciousness being united, and universe becomes anthropocosmos and cosmoanthropos. And this way of seeing the universe you can find if you look for it. And the contemporary spiritual teacher, one of my most favorite, George Gurdjieff, has this cosmic law at the basis of his cosmology and philosophy. There are a number of laws, but most fundamental. He calls this triamazikamno, which is law of threefoldness. And this law of threefoldness you will find in the literature throughout human history. And this law of threefoldness applies both to anthropos, the human, and cosmos, which means we and cosmos constitutionally have a tripartite structure. The ontological structural constitutions of the cosmos and anthropos are both in the structure of trichotomy. So now, in Christianity, we have the Holy Trinity of God, Holy Ghost, and Son, which correspond to the perennialism, the tradition of the perennial wisdom, spiritus, anima, and corpus, which Saint Augustine used in his theological expositions. In Hinduism and Jainism, we have tribhuvāna. Do you say tribhuvāna or tribhuvāna?
Tribhuvan.
Oh, okay, thank you. 3 worlds. In Buddhism, we have trikāya, 3 bodies or gestalts of Buddha. In Taoism, the 2 primary canonical texts, Tao Te Ching, which we studied, and Taishuan Jing, both employ 81 ternary tetragrams based on the ternary logic, consisting of Tian, Di, Ren, or in Japanese, Ten, Chi, Jin, 10 positive and active force or element, Chi, negative or passive force or element, and Jin, neutral or reconciling force or element. The threeness has been present in the esoteric consciousness of humanity since the beginning. And let's look at this more carefully. And I want you to see this as anthropos and cosmos. Since I know Buddhism better than any other spiritual traditions, I will use this trikāya. And trikāya is a dharmakāya, sambhogakāya, and nirmanakāya, which can be interpreted as corresponding to Christian Trinity of God, Holy Ghost, and Sons, or spiritus, anima, and corpus of perennialism. So dharmakāya, God and spiritus, is the realm of being which is beyond time and space, that which is eternal and infinite, the transfinite realm of reality, to which we have access through our spiritual intelligence. And we understand through our spiritual intuition. That dimension exists in the cosmos as well. So the cosmos is infinite and eternal in the sense that goes beyond space and time. Sambhogakāya, the second, Holy Ghost, and anima, is that realm of being which is only time, only of time, only temporal, no space, no spatiality, that which is bound only by time but unbound by space. This is the sempiternal or eviternal. Saint Thomas Aquinas used the word eviternal. It is a cross of eternity, not exactly eternity, and which means like everlasting. So this is like spiritual intelligence and the Dharmakaya and Sambhogakaya, although we are kind of separating, but it is like where you focus your attention. But both dimensions, it is a supracorporeal. It is not bound by space. And that dimension exists in the cosmos as well. And Nirmanakaya, or sun, corpus, is the realm of being which is of space and time. That which is bound by time and space. This is the corporeal realm of reality. So corporeal realm of reality and corporeal perception, sensory perception, and conception. And so far, the physics and science has been limited in this dimension. But this is a part of the universe and part of our intelligence and consciousness. There are higher realm to our consciousness and to the universe. Actually, this is kind of off subject. Maybe I can talk about this when we talk about cosmology. But today's science is not even corporeal. It's subcorporeal. Subatomic particles are not corporeal entities. It is subcorporeal. As Heisenberg said, subatomic particles are something like a potential. It is something between existence and potentiality. All there is probability. So, like Aristotelian hieromorphism and Thomas Aquinas's substantial form has tremendous validity. For something to exist, it needs to have materiality and form. Subatomic level, it only has materiality. It can be measured. But when it is measured, it enters into corporeality. Until then, it only has a probability. So it subsists. So ontologically, corporeal dimension is more primary than this subcorporeal realm. But anyway, so going back to the psychology, which corresponds to cosmology, the whole thing opens up. Universe, the Ubermensch, the Homo Deus, new kind of humans, and all the initiative esoteric schools throughout the ages, they experience themselves and the universe in a much more alive and expansive way. And because psychology and cosmology correspond, your life has meaning, and cosmos has meaning. We live in a very meaningful universe. In the beginning was the meaning. The meaning was with God. The meaning was God. It does not deny some of the discoveries that science has made in the last 200 years. But it will be partial. It is a part of the whole scheme of cosmos. which is reflected in our human consciousness, full spectrum consciousness and full spectrum universe. And it is quite remarkable. Just people need to see the grandeur of their own being. So that's most essential, and in our presentation, third component of the psychology of Ubermensch. Fourth dimension, fourth element is that there is no such thing as unconsciousness, but only consciousness. In the full spectrum consciousness of the Ubermensch, there will be no split between the conscious and unconscious. Modern psychology was begun and developed in the 19th and early 20th centuries by such brilliant minds as Wilhelm Wundt, Gustav Le Bon, William James, Pierre Janet, Sigmund Freud, Boris Sidis, Alfred Adler, Carl Jung, and so on and so forth. Most of their psychological theories and psychological theories developed by their followers were developed within the Cartesian paradigm. Therefore, physics and psychology are literally a world apart. The thought of looking at the possible connection, structural ontological connection between the macrocosm and microcosm never even occurs. Maybe Jung has some inkling. Further, such influential theories as those of Freud, Adler, and Jung were developed mostly by medical doctors, psychiatrists, primarily inside the therapeutic setup through the study of so-called mental or psychological illnesses. They studied the psychology of those who suffer from psychological illnesses, and therefore those who are severely split and divided within. In one sense, when you focus on some aspect of psychology, it helps to study some extreme cases. But to study the psychology of the Ubermensch, we need to study psychologically healthy, spiritually awakened human beings. The contemporary precursors of Ubermensch, you can study directly, and those who are the precursors of the Ubermensch from the past through, reading the text, textually, their biography and so on and so forth, but mostly what they have written. So the one salient aspect of the psychology of the Ubermensch is that he or she is not divided internally. No fragmentation of consciousness, which means he or she is internally whole and complete, and that he or she has no region of the unconscious, which means he or she is self-transparent. There is an integral differentiation in the consciousness of the Ubermensch into the conscious and subconscious, the yang and yin aspect of consciousness. So the consciousness, through the spiritually inspired imagination, imagines and create ideas, then impregnate the subconscious with that idea. It is like a sperm semination. And then the subconscious, as the matrix, the womb of creation, give birth to and manifest the idea in actuality. So you imagine new future. And using your imagination, you live in that imagination and feel it. And then that whole experience become impregnated into the another dimension of your consciousness, which we call subconscious. It is like a womb, a matrix. And then it finds a way to manifest. Today's new age law of attraction is a diluted and partialized version of this process. It is an esoteric knowledge. Some people got burned at the stake by teaching this in the past. Michael Servetus, 1553. Swedenborg also came up with the same kind of ideas. William Blake, obviously. Some of the New Thought teachers understood this. Then comes the New Age law of attraction teachers who don't really understand this process. I'm not saying everybody, I'm sure there's some. And they used to advance their careers. So it served them. But people didn't really get this. This is an aspect of a new mode of consciousness. So I'm not denying a subconsciousness, but unconscious in the sense that you are not aware. You are aware. By the way, this new consciousness sees itself, consciousness, as the only reality. And therefore, it is capable of actually, by being in the dimension of time only, can revise the past. What happened in the space-time dimension as a fact, as an effect, it stays in that dimension. But you can revise what happened in your mind in two ways. One is change your interpretation of the past. Second, by creating a new story in your mind. So you truly become creative, and you become really a creator of your own life and reality. And the last dimension, not the last, but the last salient aspect of this consciousness psychology of Ubermensch is quite obvious, actually. The Ubermensch is an authentic free thinker. It is freed from sensory perception. It is freed from space-time. So therefore, it is freed from all the belief systems that arises there. So the term belief is used in three ways. One is externally originating and uncritically accepted sub-rational beliefs with doubts and questions suppressed and repressed. That's a belief system of religions. Actually, it goes beyond religion. Communism, socialism, capitalism, any isms. They become beliefs. It's an external authority mentality, that belief. Übermensch is free from that completely. And we can be free from that also. Much of my teaching has been in this domain, because unless this happens, people cannot go any further. The second way the belief is used, somebody like Charles Sanders Peirce, internally understood, rational, stable belief established as the result of thinking, rethinking, examination, re-examination, and experimentation and re-experimentation, with all doubts and questions satisfactorily answered. So it's more like a theory, and they use that word as belief. It's more like a knowledge. And the third belief, where the belief is used, this is how the Ubermensch would use. Intuitively understood or understood and imaginatively created trans-rational belief. That is the guiding image of the future to be manifested in the right time. It is a vision, and having faith in that vision. So the third belief, second and third belief, if we use the belief in this way, Ubermensch will have. But the first belief, he is completely free. So the Ubermensch is free of the belief and the believing mentality of the first kind, acquires the second kind of belief, stable belief, which is sound knowledge and understanding the world and reality, and lives as the faithful creator of his or her own character, future, destiny, world, and reality. The Ubermensch is an original, authentic, independent, free thinker. And for the Ubermensch, to think is to imagine and to create. And in that creation, imagination, individuality, individual singularity come into play. Now, cosmology is very involved, and I will have to speak about quantum physics and relativity theory. And we have already spent 1 hour. So maybe we can do the second part of this the next time we meet.
Sounds
and
good.
I will focus on cosmology. It is very important. Any change in human consciousness and any change in the world, new cosmology is needed. And any teacher who is powerful enough to really impact people, they have their own cosmology. So Bhagavad Gita has cosmology. Savitri is a cosmology, mythologically expressed. Gurdjieff's Beelzebub's tale is the most unique cosmology ever propounded.
Mm-hmm.
And so we will go into this cosmology of the Ubermensch or Homo Deus next time.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, Yasuhiko, this is so incredible. Like I cannot fully express how deep this is. This is just incredible. And so what I want to do is I want to give a chance for people to ask questions. Folks, keep your questions short. We're going to collect all the questions. We're going to organize them, and then we'll take a few of them, and Yasuhiko will talk about them in detail. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to ask. But I have to say one thing, Yasuhiko. I really loved your way of converting the start of the Gospel of John. That in the beginning was the meaning, and the meaning was with God, and the meaning was God. All things were made through the meaning.
Yes.
Without it, nothing was made that was made.
Mm-hmm.
And the meaning, in meaning was life.
Yes.
And the life was the light of man.
Yes.
The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
Yes.
Just beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to put your question on the table. Let's not do lengthy comments. Just if you want, you can do a short comment, and then you can go ahead and ask a question. We'll start with James. James, go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, I just want to ask, it was a really great discussion talk, and I want to ask if Hegel, would fall into this kind of, ontology,
Sure.
and cosmology, and because he has a more of a rationalistic rather than an imaginative.
Sure. So
philosophy.
I'll put that as a question, as where does Hegel fit in this? Next
Great,
up is Rupali, followed by Brian. Rupali.
Yes, so this was just amazing conversation. Thank you. I have a question about how do we tap our imagination to create the future? What practices do we need to inculcate within ourselves in our daily routines to be able to tap into that imaginary faculty? It reminds me of so many people, Louis Sullivan, Vivekanand, all of them have talked about imagination being the supreme power that humans have. Maria Montessori talks about it. And how can we make that into our practice? The second question I have is that if we are able to tap into our imagination, then how do we transform the world? I've read so many places that you first transform yourself, and then you can transform the world. But my question is, do people who have achieved this level of consciousness, do they then keep it to themselves, or do they make it a part of a larger scope? For example, in Jainism, the Tirthankaras wrote the books when they attained that level of spirituality. In Buddhism, we have practices, so on and so forth. And then I just have to say, William Blake is one of my favorite poets. The Tiger and the Lamb. Our students love it. They know those poems by heart at our school. And the whole idea of duality in the poem of Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, and about the lamb, who is it the same God that created, the same hand that created the lamb and the tiger? Bhagavad Gita addresses that duality in so many of its verses. So your talk today just kind of brought so many pieces together in my own mind. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. Fantastic questions. Fantastic questions. Next up is going to be Brian, Olga, and Ever. Brian.
So I'm on my iPad. Me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. This at the end you talked about acquiring stable belief or as part of the path to Ubermensch. At least that's how I understood it. Could you explain more about the acquiring stable belief? How is that different from isms? Or maybe touching on Charles Sanders Peirce as a way of explaining this. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Next up is Olga. Olga, what's your question?
Hey, hi, thank you for your talk. It's still something like unclear why there is separation of inside and outside exists. And what's the reason for creating this separation? And if this removing this separation of external, internal, and God is external, and there is something human internal, if we remove it, could it be a basis for absolute self-justification and justification of everything that human doing, including the absolutely bad and evil things? But it's good. Why we should judge it if there is no separation? That's the question.
Thank you. Thank you. What's the basis of the internal and external separation? Excellent. Folks, these are great questions. Keep the questions coming. We will collect all of them, and then we're going to select a few of them and go into them in great amount of detail. Next up is Ever, followed by Ryan. Ever.
Hi, sir. It was a great talk today. I just want to clarify 2 points. Number one, in terms of the moral dimensions of the Ubermensch, before he's an Ubermensch, does he have to transform to some sort of ethical basis of existence? Maybe, I don't know what school, but there must be some. I just wanted to understand that in great detail. And finally, the idea of reality. Once this transformation has taken place, what type of reality does this person inhabit? What's it like? Is there any signifiers to ratify that they exist in that reality? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ever. Great question. How does transformation for person into Ubermensch happen? And what's their reality like? Excellent. We'll definitely look at that. Next up is going to be Ryan, followed by James. Ryan.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for speaking today. I had a question regarding the idea that this is limited to man. Consciousness, I believe, can expand to animals, and perhaps they have imagination as well. Do you think this also applies to animals, and we're just more up on the evolved scale?
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Next up is going to be James, and then we're going to talk about these questions. James, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just have another question about desire. In Buddhism, desire is supposed to be suppressed or to be eliminated. But in William Blake, he seems to celebrate desire, and that's the same thing with the Ubermensch, right? The celebration of desire. So I really would like an answer to this this kind of differences.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Fantastic questions, folks. Yasuhiko, I have some ideas about how to proceed. There are 2 or 3 general questions about that. The question that Rupali asked: how do you tap into your imagination? And then, when you've transformed yourself, how do you transform the world? What is the relationship between you transforming yourself? Then we had a question on how does Ubermensch come to be? How does a person transform into Ubermensch? And then what is their reality like? I was thinking that these questions seem to be the most general ones. Do you think that that's a good place to start?
I missed a few of the questions.
Sure. So what I would, sure.
So I came in when Rupali was talking.
Sure.
So what are the other questions people asked?
Okay, so let me list the general questions first and then specific questions. So the general questions first is what do you do to tap into our imaginative faculty? What kind of daily routines do you need to do to make this a core part, every moment part, everyday part of our lives? That was Rupali's question. The second part of her question was that she noticed that many of the greats people, when they have transformed themselves, they also end up transforming the world. So what is the relationship between transforming oneself and transforming the world, and how do you go about doing that? The next general question was that of how does one transform oneself into a Ubermensch? What is the process? And what is the reality of such a person? Next is, why is there an internal and external separation? Next is, what is the nature of desire? How does desire work in a Ubermensch? Then there were 2 specific questions. Does this apply to animals? And does this apply to Hegel? Or how does this apply to Hegel? So those were the 2 specific questions. So and then one last question was about one of the 3 phases, about acquiring stable belief. What is the nature of that? So these were all the questions.
Okay, maybe we can kind of put them all together.
Sure.
And then I just talk.
Please, go ahead.
Informed by the questions. Just briefly, the gentleman asked about Buddhism and breaks different, seemingly different interpretation of desire. And this is one of those places, so I am an initiate in the esoteric tradition of Buddhism. It's mostly oral tradition. So I studied under a master. Then I start to see the same applies to most religions anyway. This denial of desire is an exoteric misinterpretation of Buddhist notion of desire. You see, if somebody wants to get enlightened, that is desire too. And what esoteric Buddhism teaches is refinement of desire in the process of spiritual discipline. And so there's a basic desire. When you be conscious, the more you become conscious, of yourself and movement of desire. By the very act of being conscious, desire starts to become more and more defined. And so it is not a denial of desire. It is being stuck in the base desire and not evolving as human beings. So it is a desire being ongoing defined into a finer and finer desire. Desire is life. And if you deny desire, you deny life. But if you stay in this base desire unconsciously, there is no, first of all, you will not gain happiness and cause a lot of problems. And also, you are denying the evolution and development of consciousness. That is the, in a way, essential purpose of a human life. So that's it. And then in terms of belief, Charles Sanders Peirce used the word belief almost in the sense of a hypothesis or theory. And sometimes scientists and intellectuals use this term belief in the way that he defined it. So it is the Ubermensch will also have a hypothesis and theories. When you get into the intellectual conversation and intellectual understanding of the universe, you may develop some theories, and you test it, examine it. Eventually, it comes to the point that maybe this is more like truth. So long as our being and consciousness and the universe contains the three-dimensional realm, there are always uncertainties, and there will be no 100% absolute truth in that dimension. But so when Newton came up with his theory, nobody asked any question. Wow, this is it. But now there are some holes. Now the Einstein relativity, it is not meeting the standard anymore. So when we progress in our knowledge, we begin to have a question. But when at this particular time in history, when every question and every doubt is cleared by one theory, and this is a stable belief, but it's still tentative in the larger scheme of things. And that's what Sanders was talking about. Now, in and out. And so the universe, the cosmos, has three realms: beyond time and space, time only, and space-time. And in the space-time dimension, only direction that movement has is in and out. There are no such thing as up and down, or left and right, as Buckminster Fuller said, but there's only in and out movement. So when we have in and out, so internal and external, we look at statically, but actually when you look at the phenomenon of this, what we call in is attuning our awareness to the inward movement. And when I say out, it is attuning the movement into the outer world. So that is a kind of a two-way motion of the universe, basic motion in and out. And then you will see this is in and out. Now, that only exists in the space-time realm. There is no in and out in the time only or space, the transfinite dimensions. And another thing is people use the term system. What is system? Universe isn't the system. Consciousness is not the system. System is that which divides the universe between inside and outside in the space-time dimensions. So when you set up a system, the system divides the universe into inside and outside and the periphery. When you read the Buckminster Fuller's Synergetics, he make it even more complex than the three, but this basic three, when you bring in time, there's more divisions. But anyway, so when you set up a system, you have inside the system, outside the system, and the periphery of the system. So the movement of in and out, number one, and we have a way of thinking in which we will create a system to really study something. In which case, there's always an inside out, but it is a human construct. System is a human construct. There are a way of looking at the universe without having this construct, but it is extremely useful to do this. And geometry is based on this. So I like the way system scientists use the term system, and so long as we do this, we will have an in and out. Let's see, transformation of the world. The way to transform the world. We talked about this before in our series. First, self-transformation. When you go to psychologist, you will spend hours and hours and years analyzing yourself. And you remember the past and what happened and the trauma and all those therapeutic way of conversation and looking at ourselves. To me, it is counterproductive. So the ancient people, they had a trauma in life, and they didn't go to a psychologist. They somehow transformed themselves and freed themselves from those traumas. How they did that? So when you observe yourself, what constitutes your consciousness in a continuous mentation, conversation, inner conversation. When you change, you have a different kind and set of internal conversations. Who you are is basically defined by the kind of internal conversation you have. So to change yourself and transform yourself, you just need to willfully change the internal conversation you have. It is not lying. It is by the use of imagination, you begin to create new set of internal conversations. And when this happens, things change. So one element of transformation is a transformation of internal conversations. When you do meditate, you begin to hear this, you become more acutely aware of the internal conversation you are having in the space of silence. Then you can see, based on what you want for yourself, you can imagine different state of being and consciousness in which different kind of conversations are taking place. And then you begin to have that conversation. And after a week, a month of having a new kind of conversations about yourself, about your life, especially about yourself, you are no longer the same person. Also, past, you have whatever happened, you have a set of interpretations. And usually based on this Cartesian paradigm, you blame others for whatever it is happening because the cause is in your parents, your educational system, your society. So, you don't see a cause within yourself, cause outside. This is one way of looking at the Cartesian separation, seeing external to be a cause. Now, whatever happened, happened. You can actually change the interpretation. Well, I was born into an uneducated family. There was no books, and I was too smart for the school. I was utterly bored and completely, and there was no intellectual stimulation. So until the age of 15 or 16, I said, I didn't like my parents, and I didn't like their expectations, and it's like then I changed the interpretation completely. Wow. This gave me an opportunity to think for myself, first of all. And all those sufferings that I had experienced in a short period of time in my life is a source of understanding of life. So thank my parents, my teachers. They are God expressing themselves, creating a situation in which I have to suffer, which suffering made me who I am. I gained wisdom. So changing the interpretations. And sometimes, before you go to bed, you review your life and say, and then change in your mind what happened to a more ideal scenario. Not that you are changing the fact, but the changing, so your feeling, your emotion changes. And then you go to bed, next morning, you have a different state of mood. And the kind of things you don't want to have in your life begin to disappear. So in the most practical sense, we can use our imagination this way. Now, in terms of transformation, so center of your consciousness move from sensory to intellectual reason to imagination, intuition, and the spiritual. This is a transformation. Once we get there, we have an internal conversation about ourselves, also conversation about the world. You have a different world. The first people who are transformed live in a different world. When you look at two people who are totally, lost, and the person who's enlightened. So in your world, they live in the same world. No, when you go into their world, it's the entire different world. So you begin to live in heaven. That's what breaks marriage of heaven and hell. And something happens there, and break lives there, and then people begin to be impacted, not only by reading his poems, which very few people read when he was alive. The Nietzsche's Zarathustra, only 40 copies were sold while he was alive, or while he was still sane. But now millions of people have read. So you begin to express, you be there, you live a different kind of world, and using your imagination, creative imagination, your own poetic genius to express yourself. And as a result, people be impacted. But at the same time, the real understanding that William Blake is conveying cannot be easily understood because the level of consciousness is so different. Gurdjieff's law of three has many different applications and expressions. One is this: higher meet the lower and create the middle. So we read Break, we read Aurobindo, we read Gurdjieff, and then we are here, we read them, and in the process, somehow we get here. And then try again. So you read something else higher, and then eventually you reach where it was, something like that. So, if you're committed to your transformation, that's what we do, yes? So that is the transformation. You live different kind of world and express yourself in a way that is appropriate to you. And as a result, it has an impact. And if you have reached very high level of understanding, you realize very few people actually understand you. Voice in a lone world, that's okay. And if you are speaking here, some people come, and that is amazing. If somebody listens to you and somehow develops, and so that's my response. What else was that?
The next question I would like to put forth is the question of what kind of daily practices. How do you do this on a daily basis? How do you incorporate it into daily basis?
Yeah. Okay. Before I do that, one other question I remember. So the ancient teachings and the authentic teachings, they emphasize the importance of ethics. Morality, that a gentleman asked about morality. And this corresponds to this particular question. And in the late 20th century and 21st century, psychology and psychotherapy kind of eliminated the concern for ethics. And when you go into spirituality, ethics is not really that important subject. It's actually more like a psychology. You want to therapeutize yourself, and then somehow, you have to free yourself. You have to work on your shadows of your own creation. And you have to work on your unconscious, and you have to clean up your traumas, and then you can get a spiritual enlightenment. It become extremely therapeutic spirituality, and then ethics disappeared. Now, when for consciousness to integrally evolve, it is important to evolve not only your intellectual and mental intelligence, of which I spoke, but also emotional intelligence, affective emotional intelligence, and physical kinetic intelligence. There needs to be a harmonious development of all those three. That's why Gurdjieff talks about humans as three-brained beings. 3 brains: mental, emotional, and physical. And all those brains need to be developed harmoniously. And when all those 3 develop harmoniously, consciousness develops. And when consciousness develops, when you look at the emotional dimension, intelligence, that is called conscience. Conscience is an aspect of the evolved consciousness, seen from or experienced from the emotional intelligence. And purpose of ethics in a spiritual transformation is the development of conscience. If somebody has a real conscience as a part of the developed consciousness, he or she does not need a moral code. He or she will do the right thing, moral and ethical thing, spontaneously. He does not need a 10 commandments. He will do things that are appropriate, ethically and morally. So it is extremely important for us to pay attention to the development of an ethical mind, ethical heart, which is conscience. And to do that, we need to integrate development of our emotional intelligence along with the physical kinetic intelligence with the mind that is developing. So mental consciousness, emotional conscience, and sensitive and kinetically defined body are essential. This is an integral yoga, I would say. So that's why the morality is very important. Now, going back to, so what's the practice of doing this? So we want to really begin to use our intuition and imagination, which is the intermediary between intellectual and spiritual. Originally, it may be more intellectual and intuitive imagination, but eventually, it becomes spiritual and imagination and intuition. So what do we do? Oh, first of all, you need to really pay attention to your body and kinetic intelligence. You want to develop a lifestyle, that lifestyle in which your body is properly nurtured and whose intelligence is properly heard. Do some basic exercise to keep the body in a good condition. Emotion. We use our imagination to develop the emotional intelligence. So when you are having all kinds of negative emotions, and we are reacting to life, we have been conditioned to react emotionally. And the development of emotional intelligence is from reactivity to responsiveness. And higher emotional intelligence means you respond emotionally without reacting. So reaction is immediate. Emotional response has a holistic intelligence involved in this, and then you respond. Now, how do you do that? So you can use this at the moment of your meditation. So you check your emotional state, and then you see what it is that your emotion or emotions are reacting. It is some state of life, a condition of life. Then, using your imagination, you create different conditions in your imagination, and then experience it in your imagination. With this, your emotional reaction becomes will change into something else. So negative emotion, anger, can become compassion. So by the use of imagination, you idealize a condition and experience a heightened emotion. This is a practice and you can do. And when you become good at this, in any situations, you start to not react, but switches into emotional response and begin to have a different kind of emotion, which means you begin to be not influenced by the happenings in the world. So it is a change in the interpretation and a change in the condition in your emotion, so you basically change the state of consciousness, which reflects in your state of emotion. And this is after a week, a month of practicing this, you will notice a huge difference because you are no longer reacting. You are, through your imagination and the change in the state of consciousness, you begin to respond. And you see, nothing that is happening in this world deserves to negatively impact you. You are God. Don't bother me. I am going to be in a good mood no matter what happens. And actually, when you look at the emotion deeply, the ecstasy is the most fundamental emotion of bliss. Ananda is not only there when only you hear. When you really go deeper into emotion, the fundamental emotion that you can experience is Ananda, and then we forget about it, and we do this, and then when again. But having gone through this transformational process, now you are no longer disturbed by it. It does not mean you stop completely reaction. Of course, it happens, but somehow you are no longer. There will be no chain reactions. There may be initial reaction, absolutely, but there will be no chain reaction. Somehow this reaction stops, and then you go back to your, good emotions, positive emotions, so to speak, and there you have achieved higher emotional intelligence because now you have a control and mastery over your emotions. Emotion runs people. You are no longer be run by emotion. When you are in that state of a higher emotional intelligence, you will also have a conscience. Now, one example of a practice is actually Buddhist Eightfold Path. And you don't need to be a Buddhist to do it, actually. You can actually modify it to your own. The first one is holistic vision. So what is it? Well, you have a vision of future, your future, that what you want to be, who you want to be, and what kind of world you want to live, and what kind of things that you will be doing. Like you have a holistic vision of your world, yourself, and your life. Then next one is integral thinking, which is more like an imagining that to be having become reality. Then you begin to shoken shoshi, shogo, shogun. So then you begin to speak from it. meaningful speech. And then, what was that? I forgot the Eightfold Path. Do you know, remember?
I don't know it offhand. Sorry.
Shoken Shoshi. Shomo Shomyo, Shonen Shoshori. Wow, God. Anyway.
Mhm.
Anyway, you begin to, when you transcend, you forget everything.
Exactly. It's like you walked it so much that
Wow,
it's your path.
for being a Buddhist priest, forgetting the Eightfold Path is like unbelievable. What happened to me? Anyway.
It's progress, Yasuhiko. It's
yeah,
all one to you.
That's my interpretation at this moment.
Yes.
Anyway, so you have a you imagine this ideal state, and you begin to live in that world, and you start to feel it within yourself, and live your life in accordance with that world that you have created in your imagination. And that is one of the practices you can do. So you pay attention to your physical, you pay attention to your emotion, and you use the imagination to continuously create your life in the way that you want to live.
Thank you. What I want to do is that I just wanted to highlight the difference between the modern thought and what you've been saying. And I want to do it using all the 4 points that you discussed. Being at cause versus effect. Most modern people regard their life as being shaped outside in.
Yes.
This is being shaped inside out.
Yes, exactly.
Secondly,
that is beautifully said.
Wonderful. Secondly, modern people think about, whenever they think about thinking or levels of intelligence, they are looking at information processing, at best, kind of rationally organizing it. Whereas this approach comes from 2 levels up.
Yes.
Starts with spiritual intelligence, which is informing the intuition, and it includes the other two parts, but driven from this 4th level, which is a completely integrative way of dealing with every bit of knowledge, as opposed to disintegrated way of just reacting to individual separate things. So that's the second one. The third one is the integration of psychology and cosmology.
Yes.
Because the modern world, thanks to Descartes and everybody that have taken that in, they look at it as 2 separate things. This is an integrated way. It is focusing on, Louis Sullivan puts it very beautifully, life began to break in upon him, a continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny, driven by the inside, driven by the soul inside. So that, and the last one was your observation about how modern psychology has developed in the context of things going wrong. And you're looking at only people who are disintegrated with all kinds of disintegrations. So this is, it's a profoundly different, it's an integrated being driven from the center, fully married to the world. So it removes these dichotomies of matter and spirit and makes it one. So it's a profoundly different view than what people have. So the transition between what people are, most people are, and this, there is a significant amount to go. So that's the distance that I wanted to just highlight.
Yes. Now I just checked the Eightfold Path.
Yes.
Because recently I changed the interpretation of it. As a result, I forgot about original and also new interpretation. So the first is the holistic vision, as I said, and in the context of a conversation, you can have an integrated holistic vision of your new life, new self, and new world. The next one is the integral thinking, or you can say the imagination, integral imagination, where you really imagine that world to be present now. Then third is the meaningful speech. So you begin to speak from that world. Living in that world, you speak from there. And then right action, which is also you act in accordance with that world. And then number 5, my translation says holistic living. The holistic living is that you pay attention to every aspect of our life, body, emotion, and mind, and you nurture all of this. And also you need to have a lifestyle which is conducive to the evolution of your consciousness and living accordance with the vision that you have. Then integral discipline. You need to have the self-discipline to stick with this one. You need every day you do this. Holistic vision, integral thinking, meaningful speech, right action, and holistic living. And discipline means that you remind yourself, you remember yourself, and continue to live that life. And there's a superstructure to this. Complete mindfulness and complete integrity. And which means you do all those things, and then you remain mindful, and you be aware, stay conscious, and then integrity, complete integrity, samadhi, means you are in the state of being that is beyond time, space, where your consciousness resides in that space, so that all the remaining 7 path is present in space-time reality. And so Eightfold Path was originally designed for some people many centuries ago, but what is good about it is it has a integrity, and it has a completeness. You need to have a complete integral yoga in Sri Aurobindo's terminology, and it needs to be singularly, cosmically, evolutionary designed for you. You need to find a way, but you need to know the element that need to be present. So that is my answer. It is an extremely important question, and thank you for.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yasuhiko. This was incredible. I'm going to have to listen to it immediately afterwards in order to get more and more out of it. But thank you so much, and look forward to next time. And thank you everybody for your questions, great questions. Have a nice evening, everybody. Bye.